Good morning, folks. This is Ashdan Karadenis representing the country where I was born and raised. Now, what we have here is our governance of our Liberal Party opposed to the sides of the Conservatives, joining alongside with its NDP to hold the House in contempt to not allow another election would be rhetoric in this time, maybe so, but at least the Conservatives are putting the price tag on Canadians' initiatives. Now, right now, my friends, the conditioning in Toronto is very dire, but it's keeping it on the lockdown. Knowing very well with foreign interference and how wide and magnascope it is. Now, let me give you the rundown. Canada is, and for always will be, the country that it's known for is partition in the World Organization of Treaties and Geneva Conventions of Articles of War that is contradictory to what's happening right now in the Asia part of Middle East, which is part Israel and Palestine. You know, as world historians know, you would have to look at the angle more so than straight lines. Okay. I don't know who you're trying to convince here, but Canada is the last bastion of our sovereignty than any other country in this world. Do you understand that? Now, if they have to make comparison, if it's a democracy, but let me give you the rundown. America, as you know, is a high commodity stake in order to portray world dominance in the peace effort. Now, when I say peace, what does I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Well, countries opposed to U.S. initiatives about their trading routes are far outstretched to know what's going on in the coastal lines of America. As you know, the idea of drill, baby, into the Louisiana offshore drilling and what happened with Katrina. You know, we know also what happened in New York City several years ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic. You know, these are catastrophes that it's happening before. Hurricane season was not as heavy, but we know there's a gambit of information out there that talks about our environment with the hostilities that are occurring. Now, when we're talking about those people's backyard, we're talking about the Middle East, including the Mediterranean Sea, connected to the Red Sea, to the Black Sea, to the Aegean Sea. These are all major hubs of trading routes. Now, we know, for example, what happened in Libya. We know what's happening in Egypt. We know what's happening in Israel. Now, the idea of having 2, 3, 4, 5 million people displaced, disproportionate, and allowing decade after decade to say, don't worry, we have it under control. Well, Mr. Netanyahu, this is Canadian values of principles that matter before the courts of our democracy. Right now, the party members are aligning with Israel to know that Mr. Trudeau has no comprehension of what is going on, other than knowing what he is saying in the European Union, but does not delay the course of justice when we're asking Mr. Trudeau will make an appearance in ICJ comparable to, say, if it's national security threat. Okay, we know what happens in Vancouver has happened in Montreal, Maritimes, but in Toronto, we're more concerned about not the disenfranchisement of our society and civilization, how we live with all cultural means. But again, we will not have perpetrators come upon here. Now, our enrollment of our backlog of immigration, asylum seekers, refugees is so wide and dynamic. This great land of ours is a great opportunist, but we'll never forget Canadians who in initiatives going forward what is most important. Now, United States has an issue with its current President, Mr. Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't have to make comparisons, but it is very dire. We have to also understand there's no dual citizenship with Americans. America has their foretold tell to what they have doctrine in their own country. But I don't have to talk about their connectivity to the commerce world that is connected to Canadians. That is why I and many other Canadians and hopeful others citizens know as well that we stand on these fundamental principles that always stood up for Canadian and Canadian values. Now, regardless if you're hearing about what happened and why and it is, when U.S. has taken responsibility for twice, thrice in my invasion in Iraq is not something that is most laughable. When CIA think tanks and you have your counter Sabah party in Iraq, and when they disinfraction, they left it in no man's land, right? So when you're talking about that whole destabilization, that price tag is a heavy toll. Now, going forward, the U.S. has only objection is to say, not in my backyard, as those represented countries in that region want to handle their own mess of things that are happening, in particular in Israel. Now, I don't have to tell you how it is, but I'm going to tell you what it's like. America's doctrine of its ideas is as world historians, I'm not going to here to lie to you and tell you what's objective is or non-objective is, but the idea is to say that world police and the idea that hold the sanctum of peace doesn't work well when you're talking about armaments, destruction of civilizations that are very confronting. Now, when you're talking about NATO alliance that are constricted with the European Union, in particular with Ukraine, and why is that objectionary and why it is a major trading route where it leads into other avenues of dominance. But as I said, 2 decades ago, with the build-up and breakaway republic and the massive amount of migrants running from those regions caused by the inlays of confronting those areas with war rationale to make people from west of Aleppo, Iraq, and all those countries surrounding like Jordan, would have to look like Turkey, right? We have to look at Iran. All these countries are concerned because of failed U.S. policies. The idea is what is the governance of goods and services is to sow of seed of their oats. Now, Canadians know far too well when things go bad, we stand on guard in our shores and make sure that our obligation is for the people who represent our country and in what it says now going forward worldwide, especially in particular what's happening in Israel connected to United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. This is all conforming. It's too much hostility, too much disinfractions. Now, when we're asking about Russia and their idea of perpetrating a war onto themselves, it's just doubling down on its border about those migrants of mass people forming those alliances with other countries that are running from its ideas that are running from those war rationale thinking is out the window. When you have 10, 20, 25 million people running from those areas for the governments, people now realize how the Commonwealth affected that area. We know our resources are far from few to know that's in their backyard. Those countries look at those ideas, and then you ask about NATO's obligation. For example, 2-3 decades ago, we were talking about Greece and Turkey's NATO obligations. But since then, in 93, 92, since the outbreak of the Yugoslavian war confronted those ideas, which turned into the Bosnia-Herzegovina war. And since then, all those states, we're talking major inlays, is very vital for the commerce and the goodness of this border patrolled countries that are protected to the United Nations too. For example, when we're looking at Hungary. Hungary is situated in the middle of those areas which is not connected by the waterways. So it is clearly dependent on its road and airways. When you ask those countries patrolled by the sea, it is a vital, integral part of society's norms of our trading routes that is global. But my friends, do not be warned. We're living in the most auspicious times and the most derelict times. Now, Canadians are being told no. you're going to be asked what our best interests are. But we will hold democracy. As you know, we need a biased, non-confrontation country like such as Canada is. We don't have to beckon to the United States. I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize for Canadians and their Canadian values to know America's inroad railroad system is disfractured. To know that they rather spend their money overseas budgets to fight crime and the way that world dominance of police, it doesn't work in the streets of any major metropolitan city in America. As you know, it is a war zone. So when you got to think about how this is most arguable when it comes to asking other questions, how can they dominate this arena as being the world dominance of world peace when you have the facts and information in front of you? My editorial opinion, does not mean much more than what my conscience might say, but what matters most is my opinion about warfare, world history, and the ever-changing geographical nature of our beings. When we ask these questions and we have our visitors come to Canada, we know why, because we make sure that what we say is how we vote, and we want our politicians to also ascertain that. Now, most people think our Canadian politics is a way out the window, and our finances and our finance department, including our attorney general, our defense environment ministers, our transportation ministers, and you want everyone to be accountable. Well, that's what we do. And we make sure those taxes that Canadians pay goes in our roadways. When we look at America and its infrastructure, its roadways, it's so confronting that we would ask, why would their resolution be but they plight and plunder? America was built on the backbone of those ideas, to know that ideas are surmountable to what they caused. The wars, the disinfraction every 4 to 8 years. So to point their finger at the obvious is also pointing their finger at their own ideal settings that failed upon them. So when we want those politicians to make sure when we vote for them, you don't have to ever forget, this is you vote them in, you can vote them out. This is Ashdan Karadenis signing out.